Hi guys, welcome back to another Hugh video, and in this video I'm going to be showing you how to replace an iPhone 6s LCD and battery. You may recognize this iPhone from a previous video where I replaced the LCD. Unfortunately, the owner has yet again broken the screen and LCD. So I thought I'd take this opportunity to give you guys a tutorial style video on replacing these parts. Along with changing the LCD, she's also asked me to replace the battery as the old one is worn out, so I'll also be doing that. To repair this iPhone, I of course need the new LCD and battery. And as for tools, the job requires a phillips screwdriver, pentalobe screwdriver, as well as a suction cup, pry tool, tweezers, and a spudger. To begin, I can first power off the device and remove the two bottom screws using a pentalobe screwdriver. I happen to have a toolkit which contains a bunch of different screwdriver bits, which I can just put into the one driver. If you're repairing many devices or many phones, then this is definitely a toolkit you want to have around, as it helps you with many different electronics. Otherwise, the ones included with most parts online or can be purchased very cheaply also work for a once-off kind of job. I can then use a suction cup to attach to the screen, which will help me lift up the display a little bit before I can go ahead and pry up the rest of it using a pry tool here. As the 6S does contain a waterproofing seal, it will be a little bit more difficult to lift up the display due to the adhesive on that seal. This phone happened to turn on during the repair, so I went ahead and just powered it off by holding the power and home buttons for 10 seconds before I can then proceed to open up the iPhone. When you open the display, you will notice some gaskets still adhered to the screen. You can just flick that off with your finger. Once you lift up the iPhone LCD, you do not want to bend the LCD past 90 degrees to the iPhone, as that can damage the LCD flex cables. You can then proceed to disconnect the battery by first removing the two phillips screws holding down the metal retaining bracket. Then, using a pair of tweezers, lift up the bracket, which will reveal the dock connector flex cable and the battery flex cable, and you go ahead and disconnect that battery cable. Only after proceeding to disconnect the battery first, you can then go ahead and remove the LCD. That can be done by simply removing the 4 phillips screws that are on the bracket, which cover up the flex cables to the LCD itself. If you don't disconnect the battery first, you have a very high chance of frying the entire phone just by shorting out those connectors. I've seen many people do this, so be very careful and make sure to disconnect the battery first. Removing the bracket will reveal these flex cables. This one right here is for the home button. The one across from that is the front-facing camera and microphone, and the last one is the actual LCD and digitizer connector. Now, you can skip this step if you're not replacing the battery, but in my case, as I need to replace the battery, I can go ahead and remove the Taptic engine. To do that, you just need to remove the 2 screws either side of it and remove it from the iPhone. This will give you enough room to remove the battery tabs. If you do not remove this, you have a higher risk of breaking these battery tabs. Apple decided it was a good idea to glue their batteries down, which makes the battery removal process very difficult, and you have a very high chance of ripping these tabs. To reveal the actual pull tabs, you need to use some kind of tweezer or whatever to actually disconnect the adhesive from the top of the battery. I found it easier to use a plastic spudger, as you are less likely to stab the battery, and it's a little bit easier to get underneath the adhesive and pull it away from the battery. Once you've got both tabs free, you can then go ahead and try and pull them out of the device. Now, I like to make sure to get a good grip on these connectors and pull pretty much as straight as you can without too much bend in the adhesive, or you can rip the adhesive itself. Now, as I was beginning to pull, I noticed a rip in the adhesive itself. I believe this was a manufacturing defect with this tab, as I don't see anything that it could have got caught on or caused the actual strip to tear. Pulling the tab even further, it just made the tear even bigger. As you can see in the video, I got a little bit further, and as it started to look like it was coming out, it literally just snapped straight off. Now, given the strength of the adhesive Apple uses to glue in their batteries, this will be an extremely difficult procedure to get the battery out if I snap the other tab. Pulling the other tab, it also looks like it was about to tear as well, but I managed to get enough out before I could move my finger down a little bit further, avoiding that tear and continuing to pull out the tab completely throughout its length, so I had half the battery unglued. But of course, with one removed, there's still one underneath. Now, I was lucky enough to get my pry tool underneath here and just pry up the battery a little bit on one of the sides there that I actually got the adhesive out of, and then I was able to get some tweezers underneath the battery and retrieve the original battery adhesive tab, and then I could just continue to pull it out of the phone. And I was actually lucky enough that the tab itself didn't tear again, and I was able to pull it out of the phone. Once that tab was released, I could just literally lift out the battery and had no other issues. If you break both tabs, it will be a very difficult process to remove that battery and requires a lot of heat and a lot of force. Now that that's removed, we can go ahead and start work on the display itself. The first thing I like to remove when working on a display is the home button, because the home button is the part that you cannot break. If you break this, you can replace it with a new one and you'll get a home button, but you will never get Touch ID. So make sure when you're removing this to be extra careful not to rip the flex cable that connects to the LCD. After doing that, you can remove the screws on either side of the display itself. This holds in the heat shield on the back of the display. There's also one screw all the way up the top. Once you remove those, you can also remove the assembly up top here. This contains the speaker, microphone, as well as the proximity sensor and front-facing camera. After removing the 3 screws, you can remove the bracket and actually reveal the flex cable itself. You can then pry out the camera, which pretty much falls out, as well as the earpiece. Once you've removed those, using a spudger again, you can remove the proximity sensor, and underneath that is the microphone itself, so be very careful not to rip that when removing, as it is glued down with some adhesive. With that removed, we can remove the heat shield from the old LCD and have everything to transfer over to the new display. A good tip for anyone repairing a device is to make sure to keep your screws organized. You don't want to put them in the wrong spot and damage anything. So as you can see here, I like to set the part out and then put the matching screws next to the part itself, which just helps me remember when it comes to reassembling things where everything goes. It's definitely a nice technique to have. So now that I've got the new LCD, it's time to start to reassemble it with the old parts from the cracked LCD. So I start off with the heat shield itself, and that has 3 screws on one side and 2 screws on the other one, with 1 up the top. So a total of 6 screws go into this to hold the shield down onto the back of the LCD. With the heat shield installed, I can then proceed to install the top flex cable into the LCD. Like I said before, this contains many of the things on the top of the display itself. First of all, attach the microphone with the new adhesive, and then you can just clip in the new proximity sensor and everything, pop in the earpiece, and then just clip in that camera, which keeps everything in place, and then the bracket goes on top of that, stops anything from coming unplugged. When doing this, make sure that the camera at the front of the LCD is lined up correctly with the hole. You don't want to assemble everything only to find out that the front-facing camera isn't lined up properly. After that, it's time to reinstall the home button, which I do last, yet again to avoid getting it damaged, which I can go ahead and clip it in, put everything back on and slide the bracket underneath the heat shield and screw its 3 Phillips head screws in. It's very important to make sure when you're installing the screws you put them in the right hole, because some are actually longer than others, and if you put them in the wrong hole you can actually drive the screw through the front of the screen and it will leave a mark. Now that we've assembled the new LCD, it's time to reassemble the rest of the device. Firstly, I'm going to go ahead and replace the vibrate motor back into where it was before, and then we can prep the battery and get that installed into the phone. But before I do that, it's very important to reinstall the seal and gasket back onto the device. Many third-party replacement shops do not do this step, and I think that sort of just shows the difference between Apple and other independent repair shops. Doing this will help prevent dust, dirt, and water getting into the device. While it may not completely seal it from everything, it's definitely better than not having one installed. These things can be found for like $1 to $2 and aren't very difficult to install. So it's definitely worth installing one of these onto your phone. After that, it's time to install the new battery adhesive strips to the new battery. To do that, you pretty much just line them up in place and stick them down just like any other adhesive strip. Just make sure that you leave a little bit on the outside, so if you need to remove the battery, you can remove it in the way that we did with the old one. Once everything's lined up, go ahead and make sure to apply pressure to the back of the adhesive strips so they can stick to the back of the battery and hold the battery into the device. Once that's done, You can then proceed to remove the protective film off the back, revealing the other sticky side of the adhesive, and then line it up in the device, pressing it down and securing it into place. With the battery now installed, it's time to test out the device. It's always good to make sure everything is fully functional before you seal up the device and screw everything back down. So connecting up the new display and new battery, I was able to power on the phone and just do a quick test to confirm all of the screen is working and the battery is obviously turning the device on. With that now done, I can shut down the device once again and start to reinstall the LCD bracket, reinstalling its appropriate 4 Phillips screws. It's very critical to make sure you reinstall the screws into the correct holes. If you do not do this, you can drive a longer screw through the logic board of the phone. This can cause the phone not to boot up or display blue screens and random errors. After replacing the LCD bracket, I can then install the battery bracket, making sure to tighten down those screws, not too tight, but just nice and snug. The display actually hinges in at the top of the device, so you need to make sure that it's hinged in correctly to avoid the screen from popping out at the top. Once that's all in properly, you can proceed to press down on both sides of the display, tightening it in place. The adhesive will stop the screen from coming up, as well as the big display clips, which are on either side of the LCD panel. And you can then reinstall the 2 pentalobe screws into the bottom of the iPhone. But that's not it. One thing I like to do after installing a new LCD panel is to make sure to install a tempered glass screen protector to prevent scratches and to protect against drops. So this is it, the iPhone 6s LCD and battery replacement. I hope you found this video interesting and it helped you repair your iPhone 6s LCD and battery. As for this phone, it can now go back to its owner in fully functional condition with a new battery and new LCD. And on that note, this has been a Hugh Jeffries video. If you like what you saw, hit that subscribe button and consider checking out the iPhone playlist for more videos like this. Also, make sure you're following my social media, link will be in the description. That's all for this video, and I'll catch you guys next time.